You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
And welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner, and we're looking at a fascinating article dealing with Itamar Ben-Gvir. And is he the next, or is he Rabbi Meir Kahana? Did he take on that leadership role? With us right now is Professor Zev Eleff, president of Graz College, where he also serves as professor of American Jewish history. Menachem Butler is the program fellow for Jewish legal studies at Harvard Law School, associate editor at Tablet Magazine. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. Both of you, I know, have written this fascinating article regarding Bengvir and Meir Kahana. First of all, what's been the reaction to the article?
Zev, you want to go first?
Menachem sent it to his 50 million closest friends, and I think more or less we're positive. Certainly, our inboxes haven't been flush with comments and criticisms, I don't think. We wrote a pretty lengthy article for online article standards, and it was really to present the facts. I think that Menachem and I set out to write something about the history of Meir Kahana, particularly within the American Orthodox community, feeling that the wider American Jewish community, not just the Orthodox community, really didn't have a strong handle on the history of it. There's much association made between Bengvir and Kahana, but do people really know about Meir Kahana?
Right, and to Zev's point on that, when thinking about Kahana, it's our belief that he ought to be taken seriously as a thinker and as an activist within his American context, his time that he was in America. In his heyday of writing for the Jewish press, he would write 7 articles per week under 3 pseudonyms, and for years. And reading those articles, many of which have been gathered together by his wife Libby in a series of volumes, but also really reading his writings as they appeared in the Jewish press. We've gone through microfilm, we found fascinating pieces, and layering it with what was happening at that time. Not just within the Jewish press, but in other publications and through interviews and various archival research that we had done. And really finding the material and presenting it in a way that people can understand what he was writing, when he was writing, and what his impact was.
Well, he was controversial at the time. He had big support among the Orthodox Jewish community, not so much in the non-Orthodox community. And Ben-Gvir also has his reception in the Orthodox community was a lot. He got a better reception there than they did in the non-Orthodox community. So there is that similarity. But
so I think that the similarity, and if you would see the interviews that Kahana had done on various news programs, not only Zev Brenner, obviously he was on your show many times, but really on public access, CNN, elsewhere in the 1980s, there's a certain calmness that he had when he would be debating and when he would be interviewed. When you mentioned Bengvir, journalists and scholars have pointed out there's really more of the Trump effect of Bengvir on Israeli television, Israeli radio, Israeli interviews. It's really a different dynamic. And I think when talking about Bengvir, it's important to understand that, when he came to America, he was not speaking in English. He was speaking through an interpreter. That doesn't take away of the fact of what he was saying. But really just the parallels between Kahana and Bengvir really are different in their presentation and their rhetoric. And I think that's an important. I think if this conversation would be had in Israel with an Israeli audience and Israeli interviewers, it would be a different dynamic of understanding Bengvir.
Let's put this: Rabbi Meir Kahana founded the Jewish Defense League. So before he got involved in Israeli politics, and both of you write about it in your article, he formed the JDL, really, which was to fight anti-Semitism. You had the teachers, and you had even in 1967 or 68, even a poem was read on New York radio, "Hey, Jew boy, with that yarmulke on, you had to wish you were dead." So he was there to really protect Jews that were facing anti-Semitism by forming a Jewish Defense League. That was the beginning of his political career. But let's begin. I know you did some more research. He wrote for the Jewish Press when he was a rabbi in Howard Beach, right?
Yeah, so I think you are right. And the parallel is exactly as you insinuate, which is Jewish power. In the 1960s, there is this surge post-67 in the middle of the Soviet Jewry movement for Jews to control, American Jews in particular, to control their fate. Kahana, incredibly charismatic, was a solution for many, many people. I think at this moment, particularly after October 7th, I think that there is a large segment, as we saw, of the American Orthodox community who are looking to reclaim a sense of political power. Whether they can read or listen to Bengvir in the original is almost trivial. He too is a solution to political agency and power.
And also just to that point, when we talk about Bengvir, Meir Kahana served for a term in the Israeli Knesset before he was banned from serving. But he was there were times when he would be in the Knesset where other members of Knesset would leave the room. They would not want to be present in the same place as him. And the contrast now with Itamar Bengvir, who, isn't sitting as an outsider, but really is within the governing leadership of the current Israeli government. It's a different, even the questions that Kahana was asking in the 80s, those observations and suggestions are being made not only within Israel, but even, the current American president has encouraged certain of Kahana's policies, maybe unbeknownst to him that they emerged from Kahana. But the point is, it's our piece and our research is really less about offering the pulse on the ground now with, what the state of Israeli politics are writ large, but more of, this slice of the segment, the slice of the population, what it meant to be an American story. And, understanding Kahana, as Zev mentioned, as the outgrowth of the 60s. And, Zev Brenner, you mentioned, his political work began then with the JDL. One can make the argument that his political work, depends how you define political. His activism began, much younger. There's
talking about his working for the CIA.
No, I'm actually referring to his time when he was a student of the Meir and Rav Kalmanovich sent him on an Askanis mission. That is political activism.
We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. A lot of people don't know about that.
There are many of these sorts of anecdotes, and really the nature of our research was meeting with different people at different experiences and encounters with Rabbi Kahana. And one of, when he was learning in the Meir Yeshiva, there were moments of time when letters had to be sent to Defense Department figures in Washington to save Jews and to assist Jewish communities overseas. And in one of those instances, Meir Kahana was sitting and learning in the base medrash, and Rav Kalmanovich came out and, asked him to, write a letter to do something. And he said, "Oh, I'll do it after I finish learning." And Rav Kalmanovich yelled at him, No, you have to do it now. The Jewish blood is at, the Jewish lives are at stake, and we have to take it. So would Rav Kalmanovich have agreed with what the policies of what later emerged in the JDL and America? No, that's not. I don't think it's our role to even speculate that as historians and researchers. But this is the early years and the emergence, and that's just one example of an impact.
Would you say Rabbi Kalmanovich had an impact on Rabbi Meir Kahana's activism?
I don't know about his activism, but I believe he signed his smicha.
And by the way, he went to the Meir Yeshiva when he founded JDL, and they snubbed him when he went to the. I know he was upset about it, if I remember correctly.
He was upset about many things.
By the way, for the record, Rechavim Zevi was called Kahana-like because he also was calling for the expulsion of Arabs. He was calling for expulsion out of Judea and Samaria. Rabbi Kahana wanted them all out of Israel. They never met in Israel. They met for the first time on my TV set. Wow. And I asked Rechavim Zevi, would he be interviewed together with Rabbi Meir Kahana? He said no. Rabbi Kahana said he would have. just for the historical record.
Those details are remarkable historical records, and if you have either the uncut footage or at least the interviews, those are important details. And really, the nature of this work that Zev and I have been doing really now over a number of years, related to other projects as well, is really trying to capture the stories and the experiences of individuals, figures, movements, events, episodes within the Jewish community in general and the Orthodox community in particular, and what is considered a source. That your show is such a source.
Talkline's a source. I think I'm not to anticipate your next question, but the 80s are in a particular. They're an anchor in this research. It was an age of fracture, not our phrase. Daniel Rogers writes about this in general American history. It was the age in Reform Judaism, patrilineal dissent, conservative Judaism, really the left, right, and center split over women's ordination. Already previously was Kaplan and Reconstructionist Judaism. And Orthodox Judaism, too, was splintering. And some of that splintering took place with Kahana at the epicenter. This was the first Intifada. This was people wanted to debate him, refused to debate him, let him into shul, to daven, not to speak, whatever the stipulations were. What's interesting is looking at a current moment, it's not the age of fracture for Orthodox Judaism. To the contrary, for American Judaism generally, October 7th is a uniting force, particularly within the Orthodox community. And that's what's also interesting about the comparisons and contrasts with Kahana and Bengvir.
But the interesting thing is that when Bengvir was invited to speak at Young Israel of Woodmere, they initially said yes, and then they took it back. And part of what the example they used was, Rabbi Herschel Billet had rejected Rabbi Meir Kahana from speaking there 40 years ago, so therefore they're following that tradition by not allowing him to speak. So they did.
I'm not familiar. I saw an email announcing the cancellation. I don't believe Rabbi Billet's name was mentioned.
I saw subsequent articles, and they cited the fact that 40 years prior to that, he did not allow Rabbi Meir.
And it's very plausible, right? So and I think we'll probably get more information. This is this is hard for historians to write about something that happened a week ago, literally a week ago. That being said, Young Israel of Woodmere had that historical memory that the other congregations, some of them had just popped up in the last 10, 15 years, different. But you're right, for somebody of the gravitas of Rabbi Billet and what he created, Young Israel of Woodmere, there was a certain level of fidelity to that lowercase c conservative tradition of who to invite, who not to invite. The other congregations didn't have that same level of history and communal memory.
Right, and one of the things that Zev and I, in our research, literally in the final day or two of writing the piece, we looked at the statements that were issued by the different shuls that, not so much as justified, but really just announcing to their community, why they felt comfortable with hosting Itamar Bengvir. And what was fascinating was, looking at each of them individually, this sounds interesting, but looking at all of them together, we realized, wait, there's a common narrative that's being
controversial figure, member of Knesset. We are Zionists. We are going to.
We are a Zionist synagogue. Yep.
We are going to invite a member, one of Chavrei Knesset, to speak to us this Shabbat.
And just what's fascinating about that is even that terminology, by that logic, that according to those statements, that any member of the Israeli Knesset, in theory, could now reach out and say, I'd like, I
don't know if they thought about Arab.
I don't think correct. And I think it's just interesting the language that's being used, and the nuance. And that's as I've mentioned, this is the sort of material that we're looking at in real time, like everybody else. We're just trying to see what are the parallels. Zev mentioned about the various opportunities when Meir Kahana spoke or was invited or slept on a couch, or examples over the years.
Well, you mentioned Rabbi Kahana slept on the couch of one of
Avenue Synagogue.
the synagogue, right? Rabbi
Yeah.
Rack. Yes.
And also Rabbi Rachman's house.
And
apartment.
he's doing that in the 70s. I also remember in the 80s,
Right.
Mondale versus Reagan, most Orthodox Jews, are voting for Mondale. Look at the last election. We still have to crunch that data, but I think it's safe to assume that most Orthodox Jews voted for Trump over Harris. So the political temperature has changed.
Well, part of the temperature is, and I've heard this for years, Kahana was right, is that maybe they didn't appreciate his philosophy, his ideology when he was alive, but they're saying the last number of years Kahana was right regarding vis-a-vis the Arab. Just today I was sitting in shul and somebody who's more liberal said, Kahana was right. So you're hearing that. I hear that sentence.
You're hearing that, but do people know a snapshot of Kahana? Or do people know about the Hurak bombing? Do people know about some of the things, the vituperative nature of what he said? Or is he a caricature? Are they really referring to a Jabotinsky or a Menachem Begin?
Well, I think they're looking at the listen, I had Alan Dershowitz debate. Alan had debate Rabbi Kahana on my program. And Alan Dershowitz said Rabbi Kahana asked the best question. He didn't like his answer, didn't like his solutions. I think people today are liking his solutions because of October 7th, even prior to October 7th. I believe this is written. There are two Meir Kahanas. You had a Meir Kahana who formed the Jewish Defense League that was there to fight for Jewish anti-Semitism, to fight to protect Jews in the inner cities that were having problems. And then you had the Rabbi Meir Kahana who got involved in international politics with Soviet Jewry, eventually moved to Israel.
There are let's say 4 more Meir Kahanas even before he moved to Israel, of the nature of even what the JDL was, how they're presenting and what their focus is on. And yes, these are all different parts. And in our article we mention his book, They Must Go, from the early 1980s. That is one of his publications. It's probably one of his more widely read publications now.
Never Again, I think, was one of the most popular books too.
Absolutely. No, that probably ranks number 1 in terms of what people know. Zev, I'm in total agreement with you of the multiple identities of Meir Kahana. My point was, I don't think most people who say Kahana Tzodek actually know much, are very literate in Meir Kahana. It's probably an age thing. You knew Meir Kahana. Menachem and I do historical research. We are Nogea Ledavar in the obligation to know Kahana. I wonder about the literacy levels of some of these people.
So I'll tell you a funny story as we break. My daughter attended Sulam, which is an Israeli camp, and one of the people involved was wearing a T-shirt of Meir Kahana. So somebody in the staff said you shouldn't wear it because people may know who he is. It wouldn't be right. He said nobody knows who Meir Kahana is, so I can wear this shirt. My daughter happened to know what Meir Kahana looked like, so he had to take it off, and he was grumpy about it. But the fact is, you're right, a lot of younger people don't understand the dynamic. When we come back, we will focus on that as well. We're exploring not just Itamar Gvir, is he the next Rabbi Meir Kahana? Zev Brenner is president of Graz College. He also serves as professor of American Jewish history. Menachem Butler is the program fellow for Jewish legal studies at Harvard Law School, associate editor at Tablet Magazine. We're going to be right back. We'll try to take some of your phone calls. 212-769-1925. 212-769-1925. Did you know Rabbi Meir Kahana? Do you know about him? Do you want to know more? Is Itamar Bengvir the next Rabbi Meir Kahana? 212-769-1925. Email, a wonderful way to get your questions answered, zev@talklinenetwork.com, zev@talklinenetwork.com. We're going to be right back. Don't go away. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Talkline Network.
NORPAC's 2025 mission to Washington on May 20th, a DC advocacy event to promote stronger U.S.-Israel relations directly with members of Congress and their staff in small groups. Join pro-Israel advocates from around the country to promote issues such as supporting American cooperation with Israel, fighting anti-Semitism on campus, and holding Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran accountable for their sponsorship of terrorism. Training and meals are included with registration. To register, or for more information, visit norpac.net or call 201-788-5133. That's 201-788-5133.
Hi, this is Trudy Stern, and I want to invite you to join me for Nothing But the Truth Thursday night at 9:30 p.m. You will hear nothing but the truth from leading elected officials and experts about world events and current issues affecting our community. So join me, Trudy Stern, Thursday night at 9:30 p.m. on Zev Brenner's Talkline network, WSNR 620 AM, WNEW 102.7 FM HD3, and online at talklinenetwork.com. Hope you will join me as we delve into nothing but the truth about current events that affect our community most.
Are you ready to meet the visionaries, diplomats, pioneering high-tech and business leaders shaping the future of Israel and America? The Jerusalem Post and Talkline Network invite you to the Jerusalem Post Conference on Monday, May 19th at the Pierre Hotel in Manhattan. Join some of the most influential voices in Israeli and U.S. affairs, thought leaders, change makers, and iconic personalities, all in one room. Hear from special guests like Steve Witkoff, U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, actor Lee Schreiber, Montana Tucker, Benny Gantz, Ambassador Danny Deneau, Nir Barakat, Liz Savesky, Julia Hart, Siggy Flicker, and many more. Seize this opportunity. Book your tickets now at JerusalemPost.com and enjoy an exclusive 50% discount by using the code TLJP. That's JerusalemPost.com. Use the code TLJP for your 50% discount. But hurry, seats are limited and they're going fast. Be part of history. Be part of the conversation. Hobnob with the movers and shakers. So get your 50% discount tickets at the JerusalemPost.com using code TLJP. Don't miss it. Go to the JerusalemPost.com, code TLJP. I look forward to seeing you at the Jerusalem Post Conference on Monday, May 19th. Are you looking to create extra income for yourself or for your family? Well, Talkline Network is looking for go-getters who are looking to generate more money by getting involved in the lucrative world of selling radio and TV time, as well as commercials and podcasts. You can work part-time or full-time. We pay high commissions for those that are motivated to sell radio and TV time. If you're interested, please contact us at 212-769-1925, extension 100, 212-769-1925, extension 100, or info@talklinenetwork.com. Ideal for students, for retirees, for housewives, anybody looking to generate extra income. Again, that's 212-769-1925, extension 100, or info@talklinenetwork.com.
All aboard! There's a new way to travel, and it's one of the oldest forms of transportation, travel by train. Yes, consider traveling around the United States on Amtrak. Traveling by train is a lot less of a headache than taking a plane. You'd be surprised how many places you can go on an Amtrak, and there's no passports or IDs needed. Find out how to get where you're going as soon as tomorrow by train. Call the Amtrak Travel Hotline right now. We'll book your trip and email your tickets within minutes. Skip the drive to the airport and skip the lines. Call right now to book your Amtrak reservations. We service most of the United States.
All aboard!
Do something new. Travel by Amtrak today.
800-460-3570. 800-460-3570. 800-460-3570. That's 800-460-3570.
Join Americans for Bengvir University, also known as A4BGU, on May 7th for an inspiring webinar experience, Remarkable Resilience, Excellence in the Face of Adversity. Tune in to learn about Bengvir University of the Negev's unique role in a post-October 7th Israel. Journeying through BGU's 3 campuses in Beersheba, Sde Boker, and Eilat, you'll discover a powerful story of excellence in the face of adversity. BGU is driving the Israeli people's resilience amid present challenges while leading the way for Israel's long-term future. This was evident long before October 7th and is now clearer than ever. Hear the full story directly from BGU's stellar students, remarkable researchers, and other special guests on Wednesday, May 7th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Register online today at a4bgu.org/remarkable resilience. Again, that's a4bgu.org/remarkable resilience.
Hey, this is Alan Dershowitz. One of the most important Jewish institutions in the world today is Talkline with Zev Brenner. He is so smart and he is so innovative and he has so many interesting guests. I don't know what Yiddishkeit, I don't know what New York, I don't know what the world would do without Zev. So Zev, Yasher Koach, may you go from strength to strength and keep informing us and educating us and keep fighting for Jewish values.
This is your number one station.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Talkline with Zev Brenner.
Hello.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
And we're back. We're looking at Itamar Bengvir, but also about Meir Kahana, who was really the mentor, I guess, in a certain way, in an intellectual way, for Itamar Bengvir, the National Security Minister of the State of Israel. Our guests have written a fascinating article, especially dealing with who Rabbi Meir Kahana was, and also Itamar Bengvir. Zev is president of Graz College. He also is professor of American Jewish history, Menachem Butler Program Fellow for Jewish Legal Studies at Harvard Law School, and associate editor at Tablet Magazine. Let's look, and you write extensively about who Rabbi Meir Kahana was, and a lot of the younger generation may not be aware of his history, they just know the name. So let's continue. Tell our audience, in your research and what you wrote about, who Rabbi Meir Kahana was. Zev, you want to tackle that, or then I'll let Menachem?
So this article, we should also point out that we're very glad for 1840, who really does have that reach to publish the article on their website. A really wonderful job. Meir Kahana was, like I said in the last segment, is somebody who stood for Jewish power in a moment when Jews wanted that agency, certainly in the 60s and beyond. He was somebody whose thinking evolved from the Jewish Defense League to Soviet Jewry, and then in the 70s, though he returned to America, was even incarcerated in America. After that, was somebody who then focused all of his attention on Jewish survival in Medinat Israel. The challenge he had was that whereas his views were popular about Soviet Jewry and about generally Jewish defense in urban areas in New York and elsewhere, when he migrated that level of thinking to Zionism, they were not in keeping with certainly the Israeli Supreme Court, which banned him, like Menachem had indicated. And with it, once those views got transferred to that arena, he became persona non grata.
In the American establishment, writ large, and also in general, Orthodox Jewish organizations in the United States. Having said that, there were the individuals, the people who he maintained his connections with, his friendships with, his public fights with, that even though he had moved to Israel in the early 1970s, he didn't become an Israeli thinker or an Israeli politician devoid of connecting with those with whom he criticized in America, so much so, and continued publishing in the Jewish press regularly, and engaging with and responding to rabbis and thinkers in America. And in that sense, he though lived in Israel, he was very much a presence in America. And that's really one of the things that we highlight in this article, and we focus on one episode in particular, his 1975 incarceration, in New York, and how he was allowed out for the weekends for Shabbos. And actually, in the article, we don't go into detail about this, but in a number of the volumes that Libby Kahana wrote about her husband, and also based on sources and Jewish press articles, etc., he was allowed out for Shabbos. So they started Shabbos Thursday night, and they would announce, where the shir on Thursday night's going to be, and where on Friday morning, where on Friday after. Just like, he was allowed out for these personal religious reasons, and he continued to inspire and enrage, depending on who the person on the other side was, the community.
And the other important point, and it needs to be said, obviously, is January 1972 and the bombing that takes place in New York City that ends the life of Iris Konis. He is
a Jewish woman who worked for Sal Urach.
So it's also important. Implicated, never put on trial for it, but that is a sobering moment for the Kahana supporters. Certainly. So the inflection point, certainly when he transfers that thinking to Israel, but even before then, Kahana enraged. Fascinating thing is that very important people, rabbis, Orthodox rabbis in particular, thought they could rehabilitate Kahana.
They think that they just supported him, and officially they were against him, but they allowed money and other.
That was one rabbi. And
Rabbi Rackman certainly fits, Zev, what you're speaking about. I have in mind at certain points, Yitzhak Greenberg, Avi Weiss, certainly.
Alan Dershowitz.
Alan Dershowitz, not in the Orthodox rabbinate, certainly. But the people identify that this is a man of considerable charisma, and I'm probably understating it when I say it that way, who was a lucid thinker, problematic one. But boy, oh boy, if we could turn Kahana, we could put him in the so-called right direction, boy, would he have been asset to the Jewish people.
Is that the thing they figure they can change him? I'm hearing about that, because he certainly was a maverick. He didn't really buckle under pressure, so I'm not sure how they would have even thought they could change his viewpoints.
What's the purpose of a debate if not to try to, catch a person in their
to get the audience, right? The audience, although Kahana brought the audience, so they were not going to be convinced.
Right. Yitzhak Greenberg once complained that Kahana fills the audience before his supporters can arrive. So the answer, yeah, he knows how to work the room. He knew what he was doing.
Here's an observation that I have. It seems to me that when he was alive and he came back to the United States, he was pretty much shunned by most of the Haredi community. It was the modern Orthodox community that really supported him more. You mentioned in Manhattan, you mentioned some of the shuls. I think it's changed where today you find even the Haredi community where I hear that
the demographics have flipped up.
Right, and the
so-called mainstream of Orthodoxy in the 70s and 80s were the so-called modern Orthodox. Today, if you look at the Pew reports, the modern Orthodox represent 30% of the Orthodox community writ large.
Yeah, and I think just you mentioned the Haredi community and its relationship to Meir Kahana. He was certainly in his earliest years self-identifying from within that community. Mentioned he learned in the Meir Yeshiva. He, sends questions to Rav Moshe Feinstein, published in Igros Moshe, including about the question about bat mitzvah. It's just like he was very much. Granted, that was written in 1959. It was years before he started the JDL, but he was somebody who saw himself emerging from within that community. Throughout the 70s and 80s, the Allgemeiner Yiddish newspaper continued to have articles about him. They did not refer to him as a Rabbi Reish Aleph Beis Aleph Yud Rabbi. They viewed him still as Orthodox. There were other people who were non-Orthodox or outside of the community. Yes, he was that fringe thinker, fringe activist, but he was somebody who was still within the general, space.
I find fascinating. I didn't realize it, and I researched and I interviewed Rabbi Kahana. You have a piece that Rabbi Moshe Feinstein had a situation with Rabbi Kahana. Tell us about that, because it's the first I read about it in your article.
Yeah, so it's brought down. It's quoted in the Tug Morning Journal had an article which describes a handwritten letter that they received from Rav Moshe Feinstein, where he tells them that he had been told by individuals within his community and connecting with him with people from the State Department about the challenges of Kahana and his activism, and how it's damaging to the effort to save Jews in the Soviet Union, and that he should stop. And the people who went to Rav Moshe Feinstein went to him because they felt that he could potentially exert some control over Kahana, and Kahana was summoned to Rav Moshe. What then happened is Kahana's supporters, they took to the streets, and they took to the writing articles in the Jewish press defending Kahana against Rav Moshe Feinstein. It wasn't that Kahana was going to stop because of Rav Moshe sharing with him those details, but that even showed that he was even, they wouldn't have gone to Rav Moshe Feinstein if they didn't think that he exerted some sort of communal control over Kahana.
What year was that?
I have what year was that? I'll tell you in a second.
The reason I mention that, because when you speak to Rabbi Yosef Mendelevich and other prisoners of Zion free from the Soviet Union, they will tell you that they believe the Jewish Defense League demonstrations helped them in their fight to leave.
Correct. December 1970.
December 1970, and 15 years later, Natan Sharansky tells the stories about the Triple SJ movement. That he would be sitting in prison, and his guards would be showing him footage and saying, the only people fighting for you are the housewives and the school children. And they were taunting him, and they're making fun of him. And he felt, if the housewives and the school children can come out to defend, to protest for my release, we must be making it back. These are all anecdotal details. It doesn't change the fact that the State Department did not think it was a helpful idea. And I think actually this brings in a whole different type of research, really nothing to do with Kahana, but really of the relationship. And this is one can imagine the research that will be done and should be done on Rabbi Moshe Scherer and his relationship with political figures, and just that whole world of Askanos.
The head of the Aguda.
The head of the Aguda Israel of America, an activist who was on the speed dial, as it were, of political figures in Washington and government officials. Like, that's part of the story. That's part of the the relationship of understanding all these different individuals, activists, communities, and it's something that unfortunately, to Zev and my chagrin, for some reason, scholars haven't gone into so much detail about this. They're working on a lot of the other big stories of American Orthodoxy, and we're coming across these interesting, different episodes and stories.
He was a powerhouse. In fact, his favorite expression was "the illusion of power is power." I love that quote.
Yes.
Let's take some email questions. Okay. I read with interest your guest article at 1840.org. It understated, downplayed, and omitted with regard to the leading role of Chabad Lubavitch in the recent visit of Bengvir, however. For example, it states that Yale University, an independent Jewish society, welcomed him, without mentioning that it's led by Lubavitch, a former Chabad Yale Shliach, Shmuley Hecht. Also amidst Bengvir's meeting with leading Lubavitch rabbis in Crown Heights, including Rabbi Yosef Braun of the Bezin, Amanis Friedman, Hanina Sperling, and others. In addition, Crown Heights showman provided security for BG. This information with affiliation should be clearly reported, not obfuscated.
They're right. They're right.
I
There's more to be written.
There's more to be written. And I think part of the story also is Yishai Fleischer, who was the spokesman, organized the trip. And I think understanding Yishai's own activism, his own history, his own journey, and knowing where to go to the different communities. Look, I think Lubavitch often likes to point. Chabad Lubavitch often points out that they're, apolitical. They're not, dealing with political matters. And I think there is a question. Bengvir verbranged inside 770. What else was happening at the time? How did that? There's so much that one can ask about this trip, and I think these are all details. And we mentioned the Crown Heights trip, and
there were counter demonstrations. There was an altercation.
Yeah,
that's in the article. But absolutely,
article.
One could do a whole parallel piece on the politicization of Chabad and the reception to Bengvir.
Absolutely.
Emails.
And one of the interesting things about the volumes, the biographies that Libby Kahana had published of her husband, of Rabbi Meir Kahana, was precisely just chronological, going through the chronology of what was he doing, where was he going, when was he speaking, and just even, when you realize seeing the person's schedule, seeing a visiting speaker's schedule, understanding, speaking to a student group, to an off-campus student group, to speaking to a main, inside 770, to going to different synagogues, like as Zev mentioned before, yes, the Youngers of Woodmere is the mainstream mega synagogue in Woodmere, but these other synagogues also play a role, and understanding, and it's understanding the complexity and understanding the story. Now, just to say Bengvir came to America and spoke to American Jews totally misses the story. Our reporting, our article offers a first look at the broader narrative and the details. I wonder if internally in these communities, each that had him, will they be speaking about him more? Was there dissension? Was there disagreement? Was there pushback? Well, like each of those details are important.
There was pushback in Youngers of Woodmere because they rescinded it, so that they had pressure from some of their balabatim to not have him speak there.
Yeah, and one imagines that with the various statements, which were alike from the other congregations, they too either anticipated pushback or received it as well. There's no question. I think everybody had admitted that Bengvir is a controversial figure. The question was to offer him an official audience. And Chabad did, and that too is very interesting.
I mean, what I found interesting was, and I was discussing over Twitter with a number of friends within the Chabad Lubavitch world, I was wondering, was there a reaction to the assassination of Meir Kahana in 1990 from the Lubavitch Rebbe? And it's fascinating that there does not seem to have been any public statement or any public, an example that I offered, when Yitzchak Rabin was assassinated, Moran Avad Yosef was in the middle of a Saturday night shiur, and there's a recording of this, and he's told in the middle of the shiur, and he immediately, says, he said, I heard that the prime minister was just shot, and we should a prayer for him. Like that's an in the moment reaction, and I wonder, was there a response? What did the people in Crown Heights at the time say? And this, I think, goes back to Zev's point of the changing demographics and dynamics and what is said publicly, what is said privately, what is shared, what is not shared. I think one can ask a similar question about Jonathan Pollard. There are certain publications, individuals, activists who kept him and his story in the 1980s and 90s on really in the front pages of certain community consciousness. Others totally did not want to discuss him. I mean, I think these are all, just to say that, the Orthodox community says X, Y, or Z, you have to see which people are.
And the fact that the Crown Heights riots took place directly after Kahana died, that was a major, talk about inflection point of the Chabad community, the politicization of it, where Bengvir becomes the first opportunity of a Kahanist for Chabad to react this way, one way or the other.
Right, and officially, the Lubavitch Rebbe was not in favor of the efforts of Meir Kahana and the JDL, preferring
Triple SJ or the group demonstration. He felt that having these massive demonstrations was harmful.
Right.
Correct, and he felt that also the Triple SJ demonstrations were harmful, but also, there did exist within Chabad, Lubavitch, and Crown Heights and Brooklyn writ large, shomrim of different societies of sorts, And these community activists and community organizers, there are different gradations of what's acceptable. The 1968 Protecting Jewish Cemeteries that the JDL began with, maybe that would have been acceptable, if only they stopped there. But they're different,
But here's a question. Can a JDL exist today? Because you have anti-Semitism at record levels, and you have it on campuses, and you have it on the streets, and Jews being bitten up. So the times were different when the JDL was formed. Can it be formed today? Is it today a whole different
I think the police departments are also different. I think law enforcement in general is different. I think, but
that's not, I'm going to say something maybe controversial here. What the Orthodox community is looking at for agency is Hatzalah and Shomer. They're looking for agency that upgrades their quality of life. There is that materialism. In some places, Hatzalah is really important because 911 is not available. In other places, Hatzalah is wonderful because, unlike 911, they'll take you to the better hospital that's a little bit further out.
I also think the role of CSS and different synagogues, shuls having community members as a lay security guard. Some shuls are hiring armed guards, private security companies. Some shuls can't afford that. So having those individuals, and it's them working in tandem with the police department is something that I think would have been unheard of in the early days of the JDL.
But you're referring to, when it comes to CSS security at the shul, we're talking about protecting Jews living in bad neighborhoods, walking down the streets. What I find intriguing, and I think what Americana was new publicity, new public relations. And I believe there was a time the Nation of Islam in Harlem, there was some anti-Semitic statements being made. They took guys from the Chaya Squad and they went in front of them with chains. And it was a big publicity stunt because they could have gotten harm. But he wanted to make it a point that you're attacking Jews and we're not afraid of you. We're going to have tough.
I mean, Americana, Philly, he was the first entity to affiliate both with the Italian Mafia,
the Colombo family,
and the Black Panthers. Like he didn't fit in. It was a.
But
he also thrives in an era that precedes AIPAC. Ironically, the person who wrote the most important theological piece on behalf of AIPAC was Yitzhak Greenberg. We are in an AIPAC-centered American Judaism, whether you love him or hate him. And that's the agency people. They're not looking for demonstrations to oppose the Nation of Islam. They're looking to rally.
Today would you have a demonstration of tough Jews in front of a mosque that's Hamas affiliated, that has all these demonstrations? I think that would probably resonate with a lot of people if you have a bunch of tough.
It might, but
but that's not going to shut down. Right.
That what happens is you show up to AIPAC and some important person delivers a lecture and has a rally cry for that. That's just not the forum any longer.
We're looking at the legacy of Rabbi Meir Kahane, Menachem Gvir, National Defense Minister of the State of Israel. Our guest, Menachem Butler, Program Fellow for Jewish Legal Studies at Harvard Law School, Associate Editor of Tablet Magazine. Zev Brenner is President of Gratz College, where he also serves as a Professor of American Jewish History. They've written a fascinating article on this subject. We're going to be right back. And we'll continue taking some of your phone calls, 212-769-1925, 212-769-1925. Emails, great way to get your questions answered, zev@talklinenetwork.com, zev@talklinenetwork.com. And a reminder, we're also coming to you 24 hours a day, WNEW 102.7 FM HD3, America's only Jewish FM HD channel. If you're in your car now or going to be in your car, go to your FM dial, go to 102.7, press the HD3 button, and you lock us in. You'll get us. Also, talklinenetwork.com.
Hello. Suffering from foot pain that's dragging you down? This is Dr. Uriel Levy, your trusted board-certified podiatrist with over 3 decades of experience. I'm here to bring relief to your feet. With expertise in orthopedic and medical foot issues, I craft custom orthotics for 75 to 100 patients each week, meaning countless happy feet. Medicaid managed care, including Fidelis, United Healthcare, and Anthem covers custom-made orthotics if you need them. Plus, I combine reflexology and Eastern medicine to bring a holistic approach to foot and lower extremity care. Think of me as a soul healer, not just a podiatrist. Whether it's plantar fasciitis, bunions, or everyday aches, don't let foot pain hold you back. Please visit me at my Borough Park office at 1453 44th Street. That's 1453 44th Street, or in Spring Valley at 11 Charles Lane. Call 347-386-5237. That's 347-386-5237. Or visit drsoulhealer.com. That's Dr. DrSolehealer.com to schedule your appointment today. Your feet will thank you. Don't let foot pain defeat you.
Hi, this is Rabbi Simon Jacobson, excited to invite you to my radio show, My Life Tanya Applied, every Saturday night, Motzei Shabbos from 10 to 10:30 p.m. on WSNR 620 AM and online, talklinecommunications.com. Please join me for this exhilarating journey where we will apply the deepest teachings of Torah to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
Hi, this is Zev Brenner. People always ask me to recommend a plumbing and construction expert, as it's not easy to find reliable help. I've been using Bliss Plumbing and Construction, and I found them to be prompt, reliable, and they do excellent work. Plus, Jay Bliss and his team are just great to work with, reasonable too. So whether it's a leaky faucet or a bigger project, give Jay a call at 516-288-6779. That's 516-288-6779. Call Bliss Plumbing and Construction, 516-288-6779. Again, that's 516-288-6779.
Looking to reach a massive and engaged audience? Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish program since 1981, now has 2 million YouTube views and over 17 million impressions. Our vast listening audience, popular email blasts, geo-targeting, and digital broadcasting opportunities can help your business or organization reach its goals. Talkline's ad agency division can help you reach all segments of the Jewish community as well as general audiences. Call 212-769-1925 or email info@talklinenetwork.com to take advantage of Talkline's powerful platform today. That's 212-769-1925.
Dreaming of a college degree but don't have the time or the money? Say goodbye to massive tuition bills and wasted hours. Welcome to Advice Academy, where you can get quality education without stepping into a classroom. Over 10 years, we've been helping students like you achieve their dreams affordably and efficiently. Spend just about an hour a day and in a short period of time, earn your liberal arts or business degree, all on your schedule. Whether you're a yeshiva or a seminary student, a busy parent, or a working professional, we've got you covered. No commuting, no hassle, just college without college. At Advice Academy, we believe in smart learning for less. Our budget-friendly degree planning makes education accessible, and our proven track record ensures you'll succeed. So why wait? Learn fast, pay less. Call 212-287-4826. That's 212-287-4826. Or visit us online at adviceacademy.com. That's EDVICE academy.com. Advice Academy. Empower your future today.
We started listening to your station and everybody likes it.
It's awesome. Yes, it's awesome. We absolutely love it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981. Please call us with your questions and comments at 212-769-1925. That's 212-769-1925. Or email us at zevbrenner@gmail.com.
And we're back. Our final stretch, we're looking at Itamar Bengvir, looking at Rabbi Meir Kahana, and our guest has written a fascinating article in 1840. Zev was president of Graz College, where he also serves as a professor of American Jewish history. Menachem Butler, program fellow for Jewish legal studies at Harvard Law School, associate editor at Tablet magazine. You know, Rabbi Kahana was an interesting, controversial figure, and I think would you say Itamar Ben-Gvir is his mantle of leadership, because people view him as being his successor, following on the Kahana ideology? He had a picture of Rabbi Meir Kahana, he had a picture of Bar Golson, he took it down. But from what I understand, his trip to America was trying to reform his image to be a little bit more moderate, from what I read. Is that correct in your opinion?
I didn't see his press statement of him describing his intentions for moderation. But based on what he had said on this trip, it doesn't seem like he was offering a more moderate vision of his ideology. I actually think Itamar Ben-Gvir is a fascinating person in terms of even before his entrance into the Knesset. He was an attorney. As an attorney, he represented individuals from the broader Kahana community, namely Baruch Marzel and others, in their legal efforts in the 90s and 2000s. He's a fascinating person. I wouldn't call him
the most. So there are certainly differences. Menachem's absolutely correct. One's Israeli, one's American, all sorts of different things. At the end of the day, Ben-Gvir is the highest ranking self-described Kahanist in the history of Kahana.
Yes,
and that's
he is far. He has gotten farther. As you know, Kahana's dream was to become the prime minister of Israel. He was nowhere near the, as I mentioned before, the decision making in the Israeli government at the time. I mean, his role was that as the outsider, agitator, responding, being very vocal. Bengvir has assumed a position of leadership in a way that Kahana had never had himself.
I think if Rabbi Kahana was alive today, he would not be banned by the Knesset. I think it's a different time.
I think you're absolutely correct.
So had he not been banned by the Knesset, he could have gotten six. Well, Itamar Ben-Gvir, his party has 6 seats, right, in the Knesset. Rabbi Kahana thought he would get 10 seats or maybe more had he not been.
That's the contingencies of history. There's no question that
the entry of Kahana into Israeli politics was the same year as the entry of Shas into Israeli politics. It's a whole. I mean, try to imagine a contemporary Israeli political space without Shas. It's just a whole different, it's a different dynamic. And,
Now, you write in your article that Rabbi Kahana, for example, people shunned him, but yet they still supported him and they gave him money. And this is true of the Orthodox, but probably of the non-Orthodox community as well. In fact, at Rabbi Meir Kahana's funeral, which I was there, is that it was at the Young Israel of Ocean Parkway. People could not get in. It was packed. Abe Foxman, head of ADL, he wanted to attend the funeral. I remember people hoisting him up over the fence and bring down the other side so you can attend the funeral. And here's somebody, the ADL condemned the JDL and Rabbi Kahana during lifetime, yet when it came to his passing, you had him, and I'm sure others that were in a different position than during his lifetime.
Yeah, there were in the course of the research for this article, this article is just this iteration of this article, but we published now. It's really been going on for a number of years. I reached out to the late Jackie Mason because he was he spoke at events that were also fundraisers for the JDL and Meir Kahana, and he made donations to the JDL. He at that stage in his life,
ice cream was a big
Haagen-Dazs ice cream. That's what I was going to be mentioning next. And what's interesting, in the 1980s, when there were major federal investigations into the finances surrounding the JDL and a dozen other entities in the United States, it really became known who the different supporters were. And Zev Brenner, to your point, it was not only the Orthodox. It was also individual, the Haagen-Dazs the family that owned Haagen-Dazs and others. And there actually is an interesting parallel in American, non-Jewish life. And, there has been research done about various different non-Jewish I don't have the exact word on it, but different communities that would have entities that they would host events on Park Avenue, and the people who would be showing up to those events and supporting it would never be showing up to the actual street events. And it's a very similar parallel in the JDL. And also just to mention, first of all, there's Kahana's use of the newspaper as a medium for publicity, as you mentioned, the role of paperback books, of getting his word out, just like he was able to tap in and recognize the use of the latest technologies and how to reach people.
He loved debates. He loved doing TV.
He loved debates. I mean, television, and even he would be on CNN and with people call in, and he would answer everybody. He didn't, he was very, very, I mean, interestingly, in his childhood, he struggled with a stutter, and he overcame his stutter, and he, throughout his life, he worked on becoming a better, more eloquent and articulate person.
By the way, just as an aside, since you're a historian, Zev, I think part of the dynamic that changed has been a change in the Orthodox community since the 70s and 80s, and has changed quite a bit. But also you see the demise, well, I shouldn't say the demise, but you see the implosion of conservative Judaism. And to a large degree, Chabad has replaced a lot of the conservative and Reform temples, and that's changed the dynamics of American Jewry too, even though most American Jews are not committed religiously, unfortunately.
I'm not ready to say Kaddish for anybody yet. That being said, Chabad, no question, has an outsized place compared to what we're talking about in these. There are Chabad communities, not just Chabad outreach centers. There are communities that identify as Chabad. Now, how large are these populations is something to consider. But you're absolutely right that the entire demography of American Jewish life has changed drastically.
And I also think the point of entry to different, the point of entry to Temple Emmanuel on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, or to the Jewish Center on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, there's a certain, for an individual to go into a Reform temple in the first instance, an Orthodox in the second instance, it doesn't carry the same need of fitting in to go into a Chabad synagogue, a Chabad house, a Chabad shul, a Chabad minyan. One can, walk in, drive it. It doesn't matter. However you get in, that's a different model. And Zev, who's written tremendously about the nature of the synagogue, can speak to this, at a different time. But really, what it means to have community, to be part of a community,
No, but it also means that someone like Itamar Bengvir, for example, could tap in to the Chabad network. And while he only spoke at 770 Eastern Parkway to some of the Chabad leadership and prominent leaders, technically speaking, he could be a guest of Chabad houses around the country.
I don't think that the Shabtai Society near Yale University is affiliated formally with the Chabad Lubavitch movement, and I also don't know if Itamar Bengvir's visit to 770 was an officially sanctioned Chabad event. I think that's part of the struggle of, there have literally been lawsuits about control of 770, which I know you've covered, over many years. That's a whole other question. What does it mean to say that a person is speaking representative of Chabad? Is there anybody besides the Rebbe who is able to speak? That's a much broader question. But what
Chabad does represent is the decentralization. So underscoring your point of Chabad replacing conservative Reform Judaism, I don't know if that's
they don't
sum game.
They're out of business, but they've certainly made
Chabad represents this decentralization. It is not about the central organizations any longer, which represent American Jewish life. Chabad's ascendance is part of that disaggregation.
Right.
Here's the question that I pose for you, and people ask me this question. Should an Orthodox synagogue allow or have someone such as Itamar Bengvir speak at their synagogue? That's the question that's been raised. So, question that I have for you is: should an Orthodox synagogue? Here you have a national minister of the state of Israel. He's right wing, part of a right wing government. He's a Kahanist. Should he be allowed to speak at an Orthodox synagogue? Let me speak first, address you, Zev.
I think that's, I'm a historian, not a political scientist. Should an Orthodox congregation have invited? I think you're right to ask us this question, but at the same time, what I would say is that our project was to understand the differences and changes and the motivations behind it. What these congregations do as a historian is interesting to me. You're asking my particular politics, I'll go out on a limb and say, I'll say no. I'll say that, but I want to believe that our analysis was separate than my feelings. If my synagogue in Philadelphia would have extended an invitation to Itamar Bengvir, I would have been disappointed.
Would you have gone to hear him?
No.
Menachem, same question.
You mentioned Alan Dershowitz before. Alan Dershowitz famously was asked about certain figures, whether they should be permitted to speak on campus. He said they have the right to speak there, but I'll be there protesting in front to speak. Now, that's different than a synagogue. If you would ask me, should a synagogue have him speak? I would first be interested in knowing who are the previous speakers, what is the nature of the types of people who speak. Is this during shul? Is this in the main sanctuary? Is this separate? There's so many different ways. You know, in the end of the day, a shul is a basic knesses. It should not be a location of political, should not be a political rally. And also what the venue is, the purpose. I think that a number of the synagogues that issued those statements, to their credit, you know, they put out and explained what their reasoning is, and I think that that's a very important thing to do.
Not even notwithstanding
just rehashing the official
treading. I'm not prepared to ecclesiastically remove or ban a synagogue from Orthodox Judaism because of the extended invitation.
Correct. And I also don't think it's fair to refer to the Orthodox synagogues that hosted them, defining it as a Zionist synagogue. I think that's a very, you know, in the various press releases, they self-reflected and wrote, as we are a Zionist synagogue. I think it's a shul that has religious Zionist views, you know, recites prayers for the state of Israel, for the soldiers, etc. You know, I think the question is where a line is drawn as to who would be permitted to speak and who would not. And, you know, shortly after the announcement, you know, when I was talking with somebody about the research that Zev and I were doing, you know, Nitura Karta marches, you know, everywhere around the world. If they would be on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, would they be welcomed into Fifth Avenue Synagogue to daven or to participate? I think the answer is no. I think there are certain lines. Now it's lines, I think everybody has different lines. And I think, you know, a community, a synagogue, which has older members, younger members, people have the historical consciousness, the awareness. I think there are different considerations. But I think overall, I'm not a rabbi. I don't sit on a board of a shul. I am not involved in any decision making in that regard. But I would not feel comfortable attending a political rally of Itamar Bengvir in a shul.
But is it a political rally? But listen, you're wrapping religion and politics. That's what Rabbi Kahana does. I think if you would ask
Itamar Bengvir, he is there talking about his role in the government. I don't think he's talking about a children's book that he published. I don't think he's talking about even his legal career. I think he's there for a specific purpose. I think he's, you know, he would say that he's there he's presenting his political views. And if he's not, I don't think he's being honest with himself. The reason why people wanted to hear him speak is because of his role in politics in Israel.
And his position as somebody.
And his position in the government. Not simply that he's a member of the Knesset, but and his position in the government where he sits now.
You know, Zev, I'll go a step further. In the 1840s, American Baptists split between North and South because on the grounds of slavery, and they haven't reunified. I worry, as an Orthodox rabbi, about whether or not our Orthodox community is being split on political lines. Not just because that shrinks our numbers.
But how are we being split along political lines? I think the Orthodox community pretty much has moved to the right. politically?
I think it's 60-40. I think it's if we look in the electoral map, we'll see it. I'm not suggesting that it's 50-50, but my point isn't that. My point is that if in fact a faith community is being split on political lines, it has lost sight of the purpose of why that community was formed in the first place. When politics overtake religion, that politicization of American religion, it's hard to put that genie back in the bottle.
But explain it. I don't quite comprehend. How is the Orthodox community being splintered politically?
When we see an episode like with Itamar Ben-Gvir and various segments of the Orthodox community deciding whether or not, in your question to us about whether or not it's appropriate to invite him into an Orthodox synagogue, is to ask the question about a political person and the appropriateness, the worthiness, the fitness of that person inside an Orthodox congregation. We're asking whether or not we can be divided over political lines.
I think the Orthodox community has figured out, one hopes, where ideological lines are. This is a line that I definitely don't want to cross. This is a line that even though I disagree with the person, we'll have them. This is, and this person, I totally agree with them. I think for politics, it's a little more complicated. I think with politics, a community is comprised of people with different political opinions and political views. And if we would want them to come to shul to have that as a location where they can, connect as a community in tefillah and community, bringing the layer of politics in, it's I'm not sure what the advantage.
But you have shuls bringing the Council General of Israel, and you have other.
That's 100% true. And we're not naive to think that Zionism is not a political movement, and religious Zionism, therefore, is not one of the great religious tenets of Orthodox faith.
I've davened at the Jewish Center with Jerry Nadler right behind me. I mean, this is not, but
you probably won't find him lately with the Jewish Center.
But if you are going to define various parts of the Orthodox community based on their political lines, we have lost sight of the faith that is supposed to undergird this community. When politics becomes the central point of departure, the dividing line between the two,
I would dare say that the majority of Haredi synagogue would allow Itamar Ben-Gvir to speak. And on modern Orthodox, I think you'd find the majority too, with some exceptions. That's just my perception of what I'm hearing.
I don't think that, just as an example, the Agudah of Avenue UJ would have Itamar Ben-Gvir speak.
They don't have any Israeli speakers, I believe, speak.
But even the conversation, the fact that we're finding this to be a worthwhile conversation, suggests that it's a political lightning rod in a faith community.
Jim, before you go, I want to squeeze in at least one phone call. Thank you for waiting. Barry from Brooklyn, your question or comment for our guest. Go ahead.
I'd like to authenticate who I am by telling you, first off, that the Chaya squad was divided into two divisions, O's A and O's B. That being said, I will tell you that I was a member of O's B. The Jewish people, being what they are today, and even back in the late 1960s, when I was active with JDL, you would see Bengvir in St. Patrick's Cathedral before you would see him in some Jewish temple. That being said, let me say that the people who I was with back in those days, we were fighting the Nazis in Washington, D.C. We were fighting ESU police officers in New York City. We would, this time around, with these students and pro-Hamas people, if we were active today, we would go right into these demonstrations, just like any other normal civilian in New York City, and by the time we walked through there, they would know the fury of the Jewish people, and they can't get away with this. That they are the incarnation.
You think the
of
police
Adolf
would,
Hitler.
Barry, you think the police would allow you to do that today? This is not the 70s. It's a whole different scenario.
The police would not be able to stop us because we're walking in there just like any other person is walking down the street. We're not coming there with clubs. We are not coming there with baseball bats. We were led by certain people who were experts at martial arts. I'm not going to give out any names, but I was in the Canarsie chapter of the Jewish Defense League, and we had weekly training sessions, and we learned what we could do just with our bare hands. So how
Barry, thank you for your first of all, this very important memory, but really, even your framing of it as O's A and O's B, O's translation is the word power. O's is also the Gematria 77, which the state of Israel is now just yesterday, Meir, the 5th of Iyar, this idea of power, the Chaya squad, as they self-describe themselves, the animals, the Vilde Chayas. But it wasn't just it was a Vilde Chaya with a sense of, power, as Zev Eleff had mentioned earlier. And it's, you're speaking, this is the way that it happened is as you're saying it, you were there. But as Zev Brenner pointed out, it's a different time now. Those sorts of tactics don't exactly
they don't jive with the temperament of the American Jewish community writ large.
I think American Jews would be happy if they beat up Hamas protesters, but I don't think the police would allow it. It's a different time.
I don't think they would. I think that there has to be a sense of rule of law. And I think that when anarchy takes over, I think that's as history has shown, it never ends well for the Jews that way.
And we're not offering a judgment. We simply just not think that would happen in our moment.
But for the historical record, during World War II, you had neo-Nazis in Yorkville, Upper Manhattan, and they had meetings and they were anti-Semitic. There was a judge, and there's a book that came out about it that encouraged the Jewish mafia to go in, not to do a lot of harm, but just to break up these demonstrations, beat up some of these Nazis. They did so, and they stopped these things. This is a different time, but this was actually the subject of a book where
Well,
a federal judge.
I'll just share a story that in the course of our research, we interviewed Malcolm Homeline, who at the time was when he was leading the
DCRC of New York.
No, before then, Soviet Jewry. His activities with Soviet Jewry. So I'd asked him about, just Kahana, what his interactions with him were. And, we did an interview, clarified, we have an exact quote, several paragraphs. And, he shared a story that whenever they would have their rallies, peaceful rallies that Malcolm Homeline and his organization would put on, the JDL would show up and would cause a bit of a ruckus, as it were. And naturally the media loves that part of the story, and they would cover that. So at a certain point, so he met with Mayor Kahana, and he asked him, and he said, this can't continue. And Kahana said, look, if you could guarantee me that when you speak to the politicians and leaders and activists that you're speaking with, and you could tell them that if the results don't arrive of what we're looking for, that the JDL will show up. And he says, if you can guarantee that that's going to happen, he's like, we'll stop coming to the protests. Our purpose is so they stopped coming to the protests. Now, that's an example of Malcolm Homeline at the time, and I know that he's a longtime presenter on this program. Malcolm understood the dynamics of how to interact and engage with the different demographics in the community. He recognized that having the Chaya squad show up to protest in that time, 40 years ago, wasn't something that was helpful to the larger cause. And I think, how much more so nowadays. I think the as Zev pointed out, the nature of how activism takes place nowadays and effective activism, I don't think that activism would effectuate the results as intended.
Anyway, I thank you, Barry, for your phone call, and call us again. I'd like to hear more your recollection.
Yeah, and Barry, you should write up your memoirs. It's a fascinating.
Let me say, actions speak louder than words. JDL was not there to pacify the Jews of the Upper East Side. JDL was there to have a voice for downtrodden Jews, Jews who were left behind in neighborhoods like Brownsville, elderly Jews who were afraid to go out and shop for Pesach. What other group of Jews ever did anything like that? What other group of
Barry,
Jews?
I fully agree, but the JDL was also being funded by those very same individuals on the Upper East Side. It's a complex dynamic to understand, and that really, I think, was the brilliance of Meir Kahane, that he was able to hold all these pieces together.
Anyway, Barry, thank you for your phone call. Appreciate that. Thank you. Call us in. Are you going to write a memoir, Barry?
I couldn't even begin. I wouldn't even know where to begin to start.
I'll call me. I'll put you in touch with a ghostwriter. Okay. Anyway, thank you.
I could tell you things that would make your head spin.
Maybe we should interview you one night. Okay, we're going to.
I could tell you about seeing an arm amputated in the streets of Williamsburg, but I don't want to go there. Have a good night.
Thank you for your phone call. Okay. I'm not sure what that was, but okay. It's about the arm. But I want to thank you, both of you, Zev Eleff, President of Graz College, a professor of American Jewish history, Menachem Butler, program fellow, Jewish legal studies, Harvard Law School, associate editor of Tablet Magazine. Are you going to follow up with this with a more extensive piece or a book?
I think there's a book in there. I think there's a book in us.
There's definitely a book in here. We don't yet know what the final chapter is. We don't, but this is, as we're doing more research, before we came on the show tonight, we were just doing a little of our own, going through our files, and you were scheduled to have Rabbi Meir Kahane on your show the week after
he was assassinated.
After the assassination.
That's correct.
He was set to appear Saturday night, November 17th, for a live broadcast.
Actually, he was actually talking about doing a weekly radio show too at the time.
But there's that all of those, I wonder whether the archives of your radio program in those years are extant. If you have them, those are such important snapshots of the community in a way that wasn't making it to the newspapers, wasn't making it to the sermons, the rabbi. Like, this is the community's voices, and hearing from the people on the street, and also the leaders and activists responding, trying to give their spin or whatever. Your show is presenting a very important perspective, and obviously we look forward to your memoir.
We need Barry's memoir. We need your memoirs.
Yeah.
No, I have to write it down too. I have those stuff on cassette tapes. Some of this earlier stuff is there, but it has to just be gone through. Even though my list, TV Into It, Rabbi Meir Kahane, is on video, it's on YouTube, gets a lot of views. It's the last conversation that I had with him. In fact, that was the time that Menachem Zevi was on the same set with him, which is available. But just fascinating. He was an interesting personality. And listen, he and I had a thing on the Mort Downey Jr. show where he went after me. He wrote an article in the Jewish Custom with the yarmulke on your head. And yet, he wanted to come on the show, and we worked things out again to allow him to come on. But I used to get death threats every time the Mort Downey Jr. show was aired. But at the same time, we wanted to have him back on, and he and I made up, and he came back on the air. That's a more complicated story, which I guess I'll say for the memoir next time. But he certainly, listen, he changed the dynamics of American Jewry. And you're right, he took Jewish power from the Black Panther power. He did borrow that. But that was a time where American Jews felt threatened by anti-Semitism. Jews in the inner cities were being beaten up, as this caller mentioned, and he was there to defend it. But he changed from a Jewish defense organization where he got more involved politically, whether it was Soviet Jewry, Israel. The nature changed, and he transformed it. Then he left the United States, but he also fought for the rights of kosher food in prison and other rights that he had. So he certainly is part of the
and halal food in prison.
And halal food, that's right. That's right.
I mean, he was. I'll just close with one story. when again that 1975 episode was actually may not have been 75. He wanted, when he was in Allenwood Penitentiary, he wanted to make a Young Israel of Allenwood. And in the official Young Israel history, they tell the story that, they get this letter that, Meir Kahana wants to create a Young Israel of Allenwood. And they reject his application. And so for Kahana, that was the best thing, to get rejected, and then so he pushes back and forth. And they gave one reason was you can't have a Young Israel, it has to have a minyan of Shomer Shabbos men. So he responded, we have a minyan of Shomer Shabbos men. So then they said, oh, okay, have a Young Israel, it needs to have mechitza. So he said, we have only men here, there's no need to mechitza. The Mishnah Berurah says, okay, no mechitza. So the final, they said to him, in order to have Young Israel, you have to have an active youth department. Do you have an active youth department? He said, no. He said, well, I'm sorry, we can't have Young Israel. Now, at that point, he didn't need the Young Israel, but the idea that he, wanted to be a member of the Young Israel, that he wanted to be a member of the World Zionist Organization, to be at the World Zionist Congress. He was not accepted at the World Zionist Congress. He showed up anyways in protest. Like, that was his, he was there to protest and to hold accountable the community. And, his, the Itamar Bengvir legacy is one component of his legacy. But there's really so much more in ways that continue, we're going to continue to explore in our research.
So when will the next book come out? Or when will the book come out, I should say?
I've got a big project called Gratz College that I'm working on. Menachem does too, but it's front of mind.
Yeah.
Okay. And before I let you, Menachem, what's the atmosphere for you like in Harvard University?
It is, I've worn my yarmulke on campus every day that I'm there since October 7th. I try to stay clear of walking through protests. In general, it's a good, I went to Yeshiva University in Washington Heights. I knew there's certain streets you don't walk down. There have been protests, there are fewer protests this year. But at the same time, there are also opportunities where individuals from beyond the Jewish community have participated, non-Jewish students have participated in our classes, come to our events. There was a Yom HaShoah event showing a film about the Eichmann trial and really getting into, some serious, heavy conversations. I would encourage people to, actually see what's happening on the ground, to come and visit.
I actually was there the end of Pesach. My daughter is there. My son-in-law is in Harvard Law School.
Your son-in-law comes to our classes. Your son-in-law sits right next. Yeah, he actively participates. He's terrific. But it's it's a tough time on university campuses. It's not just Harvard and the Ivies. I think in every community there's a lot of
tensions and the problems.
Yep.
Even though I told Alan Dersh I went to the law library, so his picture's still on the wall. It wasn't defaced or removed, so he was happy.
Yeah, he's a legend there.
Certainly, but he's not allowed to speak there, right? That's what he said.
I don't know that, but
anyway, I want to thank you. Listen, we got to have you on more often. These are important issues. The change. I'm fascinated by the change of American Orthodoxy, how it's changed. And one other aspect which I find intriguing, which could be a subject of another program, is a lot of modern Orthodox parents, they send the kids to Israel, the kids come back transformed, and the next generation is more Haredi than the modern Orthodox parents, and there are lots of cases like that. And I just find it fascinating and interesting. And you also find a lot of Orthodox parents have their kids become lone soldiers in the Israeli army. Another different aspect of what's happening to American Orthodoxy.
I think there are a lot of dynamics in the community, and there's a lot to unpack to figure all this out. So
anyway,
looking
for
forward.
Menachem, thank you, Zev. Looking forward also for that, and I'm looking forward for this book. And thank you for the article. People can find it at 8040.com.
.org. 1840.org. Thank you very much to Rabbi David Beshefkin, and his team for doing the editing and bringing it to fruition. And yeah.
Anyway, thank you, Menachem. Thank you, Zev. Look forward to having you back.
Thank you.
Okay, and we're going to be right back right after these messages. So don't go away. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Talkline.